Imagine you're walking along a beach. It's quiet, maybe a little misty, and you're just looking for driftwood or shells. And then you see a running shoe washed up on the sand.
Something you've probably seen 100 times.
Exactly. It looks like any other piece of trash from the ocean. But then you get closer, and you realize there's still a foot inside it.
And then imagine that happening again and again, over 20 times, all in the same general part of the world, a coastal area that stretches across 2 different countries.
That is the very real and very unsettling situation that has been unfolding in the Salish Sea for more than a decade.
It's a phenomenon that for years really seemed to defy any simple explanation. We're talking about the waters that border British Columbia in Canada and Washington State in the U.S.
And since August of 2007, the official count of these detached feet has climbed to, what, over 20 confirmed cases?
At least. It reads like something out of a thriller, but it's all completely factual.
So today we're going to get into a meticulous analysis of this. We want to move past the sensational headlines and look at the actual data.
Right. The science, the geography, and maybe most importantly, the human stories that eventually brought some context, and thankfully some closure, to what a lot of people were afraid was some kind of, crime spree.
Because the initial reaction wasn't just, oh, human remains. That happens, sadly.
Coastal areas do deal with that, yes. Maritime accidents, missing persons cases. But what made this so unique, what made it a genuine phenomenon, was the specificity.
It was always feet.
Overwhelmingly feet, and almost always they were inside a modern, buoyant running shoe or a hiking boot, all found across this huge but very specific stretch of coast.
Which raises the immediate question, why just the feet? And why so many, all of a sudden?
That's the pattern that started this whole thing that demanded a real forensic explanation, and it started with that very first discovery.
August 20th, 2007.
Right. On Jedediah Island in British Columbia, a young girl, visiting from Washington, finds a size 12 Adidas sneaker. And inside, still in its sock, is a man's right foot. That single find didn't just start a local police case.
It kicked off a mystery that would cross borders and last for well over a decade. Okay, so let's start by grounding this in the hard facts. The sheer scale, the geography of it all. To really get what authorities were facing, you have to understand the numbers.
And the numbers are pretty startling when you lay them out, especially in a time frame of just over 15 years. The complete data up through 2023 shows at least 24 confirmed finds.
And it's not just a Canadian thing.
Not at all. As of September 2018, the count was 15 feet in British Columbia and 5 in Washington State. But those numbers keep shifting as new finds are confirmed or as old cold cases get re-examined.
And the area these finds cover is just immense. We're not talking about a single bay.
No, this is hundreds of miles of really complex shoreline. Remains have turned up on remote places like the Gulf Islands in BC, and then all the way down in major U.S. cities.
Like Tacoma and Seattle.
Exactly. The water system itself is really the main character in this story.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the Salish Sea. It's not just an ocean inlet. It's this incredibly intricate network of waterways. You've got the Strait of Georgia, Puget Sound, the Strait of Juan de Fuca. It has all these deep basins and narrow channels.
So it's not a simple current.
Anything but. It's a massive, powerful, and very unpredictable distribution system. The tides in the Salish Sea are some of the strongest in the world. They create these complex eddies, currents that can shift direction rapidly.
So something that enters the water in one spot could end up anywhere.
Pretty much anywhere within that system. Debris that starts near Victoria could be carried hundreds of miles north, or get caught in a gyre near Seattle and wash up on some tiny, uninhabited island. It explains why the feet were so widely scattered.
Given that huge range, I imagine one of the biggest breakthroughs was finding matched pairs.
Oh, absolutely. That was forensically essential.
Because it links 2 completely separate discoveries to one person.
Right. And it immediately starts to work against the theory of some random serial killer. It allows investigators to stop looking for a crime and start looking for a missing person.
And there were examples of this happening.
Compelling ones. In 2008, a right foot was found on Valdez Island in the Gulf Islands.
Okay.
4 months later, the matching left foot washes up way further south on Westham Island, which is much closer to Vancouver.
4 months apart.
Yes. And they belong to the same man. It just shows you the power of those currents. The feet were traveling completely independently for months.
Wow.
And we saw a similar thing later that year. The 4th foot found, that was May 2008 on Kirkland Island, and the 7th foot found in November in Richmond.
Let me guess. A DNA match.
A perfect DNA match. Both belong to the same woman. Every time a match like that was made, it helped narrow the search and really strengthen the argument that this was a natural phenomenon, not foul play.
Which brings us to the shoes themselves. The footwear became a critical piece of evidence.
It was almost like a second form of ID. The shoe protected the remains, and as we'll get into, it provided the buoyancy. So the brand, the size, even the manufacturing date became essential clues.
Can you give an example of that?
Well, the second foot, found on Gabriola Island, was inside a size 12 white Reebok. The authorities were able to trace that specific model.
They knew when it was made.
They knew it was produced only in 2004 and sold mainly in North America. So that gives you what they call a terminus postquem.
A hard date, the earliest the person could have possibly gone into the water.
Exactly. And they did it again with the third foot. It was in a size 11 Nike. They were able to determine that shoe was only sold between February and June of 2003.
That's incredibly specific.
It is. Or another one, a New Balance shoe found in Seattle in 2014. They knew that model first went on sale in April 2008. These details helped them cross-reference missing persons reports. The shoe was like an accidental time capsule.
So, especially in the early days, the narrative around these discoveries was, well, it was wild.
It was. Serial killers, organized crime, some bizarre ritual. The speculation was all over the place.
But the official scientific explanation, while it's strange in its own right, is much more grounded in biology and physics.
The BC Coroner Service and their colleagues in Washington have been very, very clear about this for a long time. By December 2017, they publicly stated that foul play had been ruled out in all the previous Canadian cases.
And that wasn't just a guess. It was based on forensic evidence.
Overwhelming evidence. The key was the examination of the bones themselves.
What were they looking for?
Or rather, what they weren't finding. They never found any cut marks, no evidence of a saw or a knife, no tool marks on the joints.
Which would be there if a foot was, severed.
Absolutely. If this was dismemberment, there would be clear, unmistakable signs of trauma. The complete lack of those marks pointed to only one conclusion. The feet were separating naturally.
Through decomposition in the water.
Yes. The technical term is disarticulation.
So let's break that down. How does a foot detach on its own in the water?
This is where forensic taphonomy, the study of decomposition, comes in. Experts like Gail Anderson from Simon Fraser University have explained this process. When a body is submerged in water, it starts to decompose. The soft tissues, the ligaments, the tendons that hold your joints together, they all start to break down from bacterial action.
And the ligaments are what hold the bones together.
They're the cables, essentially. And the ankle joint, structurally, is a relatively weak link in the chain compared to the knee or the hip.
So as those ligaments degrade, the water's movement is enough to
To separate the foot at the ankle, exactly. Yeah. The currents, the wave action, it's a natural process. And it happens to other extremities, too. Hands, feet, the head, they often detach first.
Okay, that explains why the feet come off. But it still leaves that one huge question that the media obsessed over. If hands and heads also detach, why are we finding dozens of feet, but almost never anything else?
And that is the absolute heart of this whole thing. It's the paradox. This is where the physics of buoyancy and really modern manufacturing becomes so important.
Because normally those other parts would just sink.
They would. An extremity on its own is typically denser than water. It sinks to the bottom where it's quickly consumed by marine life. Crabs, fish, scavengers, they don't last long.
So a foot should sink too.
It should. But the one element that changed everything, the thing that turned this natural process into a public phenomenon, is the modern running shoe.
The shoe is the game changer.
It serves three functions. First, it's a physical shield. It protects the foot from being immediately eaten by scavengers.
Right.
Second, and this is the most critical part, it acts as a flotation device. Modern sneakers and hiking boots are made of these lightweight synthetic materials. The soles have these complex rubber designs and, crucially, air-filled polymer foams.
Like the stuff in the midsole.
Exactly. EVA foam. It's basically just millions of tiny plastic-encased air bubbles. So when the foot detaches, air gets trapped in the sole, in the padding, in the shoe's structure.
And that's enough to make it float.
That trapped air, combined with the natural buoyancy of the synthetic materials themselves, creates just enough lift to make the whole package, the shoe, the sock, and the foot, float to the surface and get carried by the currents.
So the shoe isn't just protecting the foot, it's completely changing its physical properties in the water.
It's a perfect storm of modern chemistry and natural biology. The shoes made after, say, the mid-90s are structurally so different from the old leather boots or canvas sneakers. They're built to last and they're built to float.
But I still have to wonder, even with that really solid explanation, it doesn't quite explain the why so many. If this is just a natural thing, why did it seem to start in 2007? Is the sheer number not suspicious?
That's the question that really fueled the initial confusion. The volume is anomalous. That police officer's comment that finding 1 foot is 1,000,000 to 1, that really highlights how unusual the frequency is.
So what's the theory?
It suggests that either there was a higher concentration of bodies entering the water in that region around that time, or, and this is the more accepted theory, the recent boom in highly buoyant footwear dramatically increased the chances of finding them.
So people's feet were probably always disarticulating in the Salish Sea, but they just sank to the bottom.
Until we all started wearing sneakers made with these advanced air-filled foams, the phenomenon isn't new, the detection is new. The victims were often people who'd been missing for years, but their remains were preserved and carried by their shoes until the currents finally pushed them ashore.
And while the science gives us a very clean explanation for the how, it's so important that we keep the perspective here. Behind every one of these discoveries, there is a person and a family that has been dealing with a terrible tragedy.
Absolutely. That sense of sympathy and respect has to be central. The whole point of the forensic work is to bring closure. And for most of the Canadian finds, 13 out of 15 as of 2018, they were able to make successful identifications.
Which gives families an answer, at least.
The confirmation they needed about their missing loved one. And when you look at the circumstances for these identified individuals, they really do support the coroner's conclusion. These weren't victims of foul play.
These were people lost to accidents or
suicide, yes. For example, one of the match pairs we talked about, the 4th and 7th feet, belonged to a woman who died by suicide. She jumped from the Pattullo Bridge back in April of 2004.
So her death was years before this whole phenomenon even started.
Exactly. It shows how long these remains can be in the water system. Another case involved a man who was suffering from depression who also likely died by suicide. His family asked that his name be kept private, but his identification again confirmed the non-criminal nature of the death.
And there was a man missing since 2008.
Yes, his right foot was found in Richmond, BC, and that finally gave his family a definitive answer. But the most remarkable case, in terms of timeline, has to be that of Stefan Zaharushko.
Okay, tell me about that one.
His right foot was found in a big size 12 hiking boot in November of 2011. But here's the thing. It wasn't found on a saltwater beach. It was found in Sassamat Lake, a freshwater lake near Port Moody.
And he had been missing for how long?
The BC Coroner Service identified him as a local fisherman who had been missing since 1987.
24 years.
24 years. It's an incredible amount of time. The fact that he was in fresh water and protected by that really sturdy hiking boot, it just shows how well remains can be preserved under the right conditions.
The ability to solve these cold cases has to be connected to advances in forensic science.
Oh, absolutely. Especially with advanced DNA and what's known as genetic genealogy.
This is a huge shift for unidentified persons cases, right?
It's monumental. Standard DNA testing relies on matching a profile to an existing database, like the FBI's CODIS system.
Which has DNA from convicted criminals and missing persons.
Right. But if the person's profile isn't already in that system, the trail just goes cold. Genetic genealogy is different.
How's that work?
It uses DNA to find distant relatives, second, third, even fourth cousins, who voluntarily put their DNA into public ancestry databases.
Like the ones you use to find your family tree.
Exactly. Investigators upload the DNA from the unidentified remains, and then genealogists build these incredibly complex family trees, working backward and forward through generations until they can pinpoint who the person is. It's a true game changer.
And this technology has been used in these cases.
Yes, with the case of Jeff Sertel, he went missing from Mission, BC, back in April 2007. His foot was actually one of the very first discoveries in the series, found in Washington in 2008.
But it took until 2025 to identify him.
17 years. It was only possible because his DNA profile, which hit a dead end in the standard databases, was run through the genetic genealogy process. It connected him to a distant relative, which led investigators straight to his family and confirmed his identity.
That's incredible.
We saw it again in 2023 with the identification of Geraldine L. Smith. She went missing in Washington in 2018. Her foot, inside a size 8 New Balance shoe, washed up in 2021.
And it was the same process.
A joint effort between a private lab, Othram, and the Clallam County Sheriff's Office. They were able to use the DNA they had to build a profile, find a family line, and finally give her family some peace after years of not knowing.
These successes really bring it all home. These finds aren't a macabre mystery. They're the tragic, physical endpoints of individual stories. And it's the persistence of these forensic teams that turns a headline back into a human being. So while the science has pretty much settled the how, the cultural impact of this story is a whole other chapter. The sheer number of finds after 2007 created this immediate and intense global media frenzy.
It was driven by what one scientist called a morbid fascination, and you can see why.
The story really took off after the 5th and 6th feet were found so close together in 2008.
It was just so bizarre. Feet in sneakers, washing ashore one by one. It was irresistible for news outlets all over the world. It went from a local BC story to a global mystery almost overnight.
I remember seeing headlines everywhere. It wasn't just North American news.
Not at all. Australia's Melbourne Herald Sun, the UK's Guardian, even the Cape Times in South Africa, they all covered it.
And it crossed over into pop culture. I mean, David Letterman was talking about it on his show.
Right. He was asking Canadian audience members about the floating feet. When it hits late-night TV like that, you know it's penetrated the public consciousness. It had become this strange shorthand for unsolved mystery.
But all that attention, unfortunately, also led to some pretty awful hoaxes.
It did. And these weren't just pranks. They actively diverted police resources from real cases. The RCMP called them despicable.
The most famous one was near Campbell River, right?
Yes, in June 2008 on Tyee Spit. A call comes in about another foot. But when the officers got there, they found an animal paw, probably from a bear, that someone had deliberately put inside a sock and a shoe.
And they even tried to make it look real.
They stuffed it with dried seaweed to mimic the look and feel of decomposed remains. The RCMP had to launch a full investigation just to deal with that one deliberate hoax.
And there were others.
A less malicious one, maybe, but still a waste of time. In 2011, after the 11th real foot was found, somebody left running shoes filled with raw meat on Oak Beach.
Just a tasteless joke, probably.
Most likely. But authorities still have to respond fully, just in case.
It's also important to point out that while the post-2007 cluster was new, finding limbs in this area isn't an entirely new thing.
Not at all. This historical context is key. It shows the basic physical processes have always been happening.
There's a place in Vancouver named for it, isn't there?
Leg and Boot Square. Named after a discovery way back in 1887. A detached leg, likely in a heavy boot of that era, was found, creating this local mystery that became part of the city's folklore.
Can you imagine trying to investigate that in 1887? No DNA, no real forensic science?
It would have been impossible. The police would have had very little to go on other than maybe the type of boot. That limb likely stayed unidentified forever, becoming a landmark instead of a solved case.
And there was another one in the early 20th century.
A 1914 report in the Vancouver Sun. A human leg in a high boot was found on a beach near the Salmon River. At the time, authorities actually believed it belonged to a man who had drowned the summer before.
So even then, they were connecting it to drownings, not murder.
Exactly. This historical evidence confirms that disarticulation and remains being protected by footwear has been a constant feature of this environment for over a century.
The only real difference is that the old leather boots weren't made of the same lightweight synthetic stuff that makes modern sneakers float so well.
Precisely. The process was always there. Modern technology just made a rare sinking event into a recurring, floating, and very public anomaly.
You know, the unique nature of this whole thing, a scientific process that looks like a gruesome, ongoing mystery. It's no surprise that it was absolutely irresistible to storytellers.
The fictional accounts are a good measure of how much this story really captured the public's imagination. It's a ready-made premise for crime fiction that feels like it could actually be real.
And the TV crime shows jumped on it right away.
Oh, definitely. The show Bones, which is all about forensic anthropology, they did an episode in 2011 called The Feet on the Beach. They had their characters investigating 8 pairs of detached feet found near the U.S.-Canada border.
And they actually incorporated the real science into it?
They did. They talked about the sneakers providing protection and buoyancy, but then they wove their own fictional, very complex story around it.
Another show, Rizzolian Isles, they also referenced it, didn't they?
They did in 2015. Their episode was called Footloose, and it had a shot of a map showing the real Salish Sea discovery sites. The actual mystery had become so well known, it was used as background to set the scene for their own story.
And it wasn't just TV. it moved into literature as well.
Yes, the Norwegian crime writer Jørn Lierhorst used it as direct inspiration for his 2011 novel Dregs. He created a fictional reason for the feet washing ashore.
And more recently, the authors Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child opened their 2020 novel Crooked River, with severed feet washing up on a beach in Florida, and they explicitly said they were inspired by the Salish Sea events.
The story is just so powerful it can be transplanted anywhere. It even crossed over into the podcast world.
Right. Stuff You Should Know did a segment on it.
They did back in 2016. They really focused on breaking down the science behind it, trying to bring clarity where the initial news reports had just created confusion.
And it even showed up in fictional podcasts.
Yes, the narrative podcast Tanis wove it into its really complex, kind of surreal plot.
That's a deep cut for podcast fans.
It is. They had a character who was supposedly DNA matched to a foot, only to imply the real source was this fictional supernatural place. It shows the story had reached the level of a modern urban legend blending fact and fiction.
Even very recent shows are still referencing it. The Netflix series Dead Boy Detectives mentioned the phenomenon as the kind of strange case their ghost detective characters would investigate.
It's just embedded in the pop culture canon now.
So when you look back at all the data, all the science, the conclusion seems pretty clear.
It is. The situation, as bizarre and unprecedented as it was in terms of numbers, is really explained by a convergence of forensic science, biology, and the physics of modern materials.
It's that perfect scientific storm. Natural decay causes the foot to separate at the ankle, which is an anatomically weak spot.
And then the modern synthetic sneaker protects it and makes it float. Trapped air inside a durable shoe turns a tragedy that would normally sink and disappear into a very public mystery that washes up on the beach.
And the high success rate of identifications confirms these aren't victims of some serial killer.
No, they are individual tragedies. Missing persons, accident victims, suicides. Their remains were preserved and carried by the powerful currents of the Salish Sea, sometimes for years.
And in one case, for decades.
Exactly, for decades.
And it's the diligent, ongoing work of the coroners and the labs, combined with these incredible advances in technology, like genetic genealogy, that's finally bringing closure to these families.
Even for cases that are nearly 20 years old, like the identification of Jeff Sertel.
When you connect this to the bigger picture, this whole phenomenon really says something profound about the ocean.
It suggests that the ocean isn't just a graveyard, it's an archive of the missing. The currents are like a massive, slow-moving filing system, and every now and then they release a clue about someone who is lost years or even decades ago.
And it's only now that our technology is finally getting good enough to read those clues.
Exactly.
So it leaves you with a final question to think about. If the science means the ocean is still holding on to these historical fragments, how many other cold cases, currently floating unidentified in the world's currents, will finally be solved as technology gives us the ability to listen to that archive? Thanks for listening.